Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the sixth round of the McLaren 650S GT3 Cup Challenge. I'm Lachlan Andrews, and I'll be your host and commentator for tonight's race, as we are now well underway with the qualifying session to determine the starting grid for today's 40-minute race around Fuji Speedway. This is the sixth round of the championship, so we are in the latter half of the season with only 5 rounds left remaining. And the championship battle is still on between championship leader Lewis Morano and Niranjan Kumar, as they're both battling it out for the championship points. As we can see that Niranjan Kumar is not on the entry list thus far in this event, so it'll be a potential easy points score for Lewis Morano, who had a troubling couple of rounds but managed to get his third win of the season at the last round in Canada to put himself back in the championship lead after having 2 bad rounds in round 3 and round 4, which gave Niranjan Kumar the chance to gain extra points and put himself higher into the championship pecking order. But it was the last round that Lewis Morano managed to get his third win of the season and reinstate his lead in the championship. Right now we are underway with qualifying, and just before the start of qualifying, the circuit became wet, which became a challenge for all the drivers. As you can see on the screen right now, that the racing line has dried up. The rain has gone away for the qualifying session, but the real challenge with these cars is they do not have wet tires as part of the DLC with rFactor 2. So it's a huge challenge for the drivers to get around this circuit on slicks in the wet. But as the qualifying session has progressed so far, we have seen the dry racing line appear on the circuit, which Mark Robertson has recently taken advantage of to score a time of 1 minute 44.7. All drivers, apart from Mohammed Azkar, are out on the circuit at the moment, with only 3.5 minutes left remaining in the session to determine the grid for today's 40-minute race around Fuji Speedway. So far, we only have 7 drivers looking to start the race today, but it is certainty to have an action-packed race featuring drivers like Mark Robertson, Alexis Klepano, Piraj Jalu, Gilbert Emna, Lewis Morano, who leads the championship, Chris Payne, and Mohammed Azkar. We are seeing very close lap times between the whole field being separated by just 5 seconds. So we are expecting some really good action up and down the entire grid for today's race. As Mark Robertson is out on the circuit, currently on provisional pole for the time being, but we do have Alexis Klepano, Jalul, Gilbert Emnan, Lewis Morano, and Chris Payne all out on the circuit trying to score those valuable seconds for the qualifying session, as the circuit is now dried up from the rain that occurred in the practice session. As Lewis Morano comes around the circuit, it's a very challenging circuit, Fuji, because of the long straights but slow corners, which is a bit of a balance for the drivers to make with the setup of the car to balance out the speed of the long straight and the slow corners, especially around turn 10, 11, and 12, where it's very slow. That's going to add an extra challenge for the drivers, especially with the braking markers, as at the end of the long straight, which is nearly a mile long, the drivers have to brake very hard into the first corner, as it's very sharp, one of the sharpest corners on the circuit, which will be an advantage at the start of the race. Either miss the braking marker and go off, or handle it perfectly. And if any driver at the back of the pack has a bad start and an incident were to occur at the first corner, then they may be able to gain some spots at the start of the race. But we've still got just over a minute left in the remaining in the session. Mark Robertson, as I say that, Lewis Morano goes straight to the top with a time of 1 minute 39.5, demolishing Mark Robertson's time by 5 seconds. And that's where that advantage of the dry racing line, all the water being evaporated off the racing line, has given the advantage to these drivers, as Jalul goes to second place on the time screens with a time of 1 minute 40, only 6 tenths off The polls so far, the provisional poll of Lewis Morano, but we still have Alexis Clepano, Chris Payne, Gil Emnan, and Mohamed Asghar still scoring points as Mohamed Asghar goes off the circuit. Hopefully, we'll be able to get back out on the circuit and get one more lap time in, but due to the fact it's only 30 seconds left remaining in the session, it's most likely not going to be the case. Alexis Clepano goes back into third place with a time of 1 minute 41.2, as Chris Payne manages to get a good flying lap in with a time of 1 minute 43.2. That will bump Mark Robertson back down to 5th place on the timesheets. But we are expecting one more lap out of Lewis Morano, Jalul, Alexis Clepano, Chris Payne, and Gilbert Emnan. As the time has reached down to 0, the drivers are still out on the circuit getting that one last lap. Hopefully they will get that couple of tenths necessary to improve their lap time for today's race. As we are now at the 6th round of the McLaren 650S GT3 Challenge, Lewis Morano still leads the championship, having a very close battle of Niranjan Kumar, who were tied with the points, as Jalul goes straight to the top with a time of 1 minute 38.9, only at nearly 2 tenths quicker than Lewis Morano. Brilliant time by Jalul. At this rate, he might be starting on the pole, but we still have Alexis Clepano, Chris Payne, and Gilbert Emnan still out on the circuit getting a lap time in. We will have to wait and see how this goes, as Alexis Clepano crosses the line and does not get better. But we still have to wait on Chris Payne and Gilbert Emnan to score that last lap time, as they both head into the final corner by the looks of it. Chris Payne will be the first to cross the line, and will he improve his lap time? No, he doesn't. But Gilbert Emnan does improve his lap time. He goes straight to 4th place with a time of 1 minute 42.6, as they both crash just after the line. And we do see Gilbert and half in the grass. Not too sure what happened there, but as the session has now come to a conclusion, we have Jalul on pole position with a time of 1 minute 38.9, followed by Lewis Morano with a time of 1 minute 39.1, only 1.195 separating the two. It was a very close qualifying session, but the warm-up session is about to start, where the drivers will be making their final preparations for today's race. That involves removing most of their setups, including the radiator tape of their cars, from the qualifying setup to the race setup, as having a opened radiator will keep the cars nice and cool throughout the race, and for them to last 40 minutes as this race will be. Rain is still a possibility for this race, depending on the weather of the circuit, but Mohamed Asghar is the first driver out on the circuit, followed by Lewis Morano. No, it's Gilbert Emnan who's the first driver on the circuit, but Lewis Morano goes a little bit off, doing a little bit of rallycross style, as they set up get those final last setups done for the car for today's race. But as I was saying with the championship-wise, Lewis Morano now retakes the lead of the championship with 74 points compared to Niranjan Kumar's points on 62. Jalul sits in 3rd place, a distant 29 points, which is still a possibility of moving up positions depending on how Morano and Kumar does in today's race. But Kumar is not looking likely to start today's race, so the chances of Morano extending his championship lead are a high possibility depending on how the race goes for him. But in 4th place, we have Arun Taruna of Garuda Racing on 24 points. Tywell Edward Wong lines up in 6th in the points on 21 points, followed by Alexis Clepano and Han Lang tied on 7th on 20 points apiece. The championship is really close at the top between Jalul and Morano, followed by a tight battle for 3rd place in the championship between Jalul, Taruna, Josh Hoare. Edmund Wong, Alexis Clapano, but Clapano and Jalul are the only drivers at the moment that are starting this race in that little section. So this could be a very tight battle for third place in the championship for today's race. Today we are at Fuji Speedway in Japan for the 6th round of the McLaren 650S GT3 Challenge, which is a 4.5 kilometer circuit or 2.8 miles long with 16 turns, a very long straight, which is nearly a mile long, and which will add high speeds coming into turn 1, followed by several high speeds corners and low speed corners, mostly turn 1 and turn 10, 11, and 12, which is commonly known as Dunlop. But it's mainly the third between the latter half of the second sector and the third sector is where the slowest section of the circuit is. So this will have to, a lot of the drivers will have to be aware that they're going to have to set up the car not only for the high speed straights, but also set the car up so they can handle through the corners quite well. As several of the drivers we saw during qualifying did get the setup right in the corners. Jalul goes off the circuit a little bit, trying to get that extra speed out of his car. But so far out on the circuit, we have Jalul, Morano, Clapano, Chris Payne, Mark Robertson, and Ascar all out on there using the final minute and a half or so. As Lewis Morano gets the first time on the screens with a time of 1 minute 38.7. This warm-up session is a good idea to see what the pace of the drivers might look like for today's race. With the time of 1 minute 38.7, that is a very good time for Morano. That's something we might be expecting in terms of consistency for him in this race. But bearing in mind that the drivers will have to make at least one pit stop to make it to the end, as the fuel in the cars aren't enough to get them to the end. But also the tyres wear off quite a bit over the course of the race, so they're going to have to pit around the halfway mark or so in the race, where we see drivers like Morano pitting early for tyres, while other drivers try and stay out as long as they can just so they can have less fuel and fresh tyres towards the end. But as the previous rounds have shown, that pitting early is the smarter idea for strategy for the drivers. We are now only 20 seconds away from the start of this race, and I'd like to quickly mention, like to thank Gorms for setting up the service for today's event. Jacek Frechek, White Lion, and Chris Payne for putting the series together. Without these guys, we wouldn't all be here today, as the time does go down, and we do see lap times on the board with Jalul in second place with a time of 1 minute 39 dead, followed by Clapano with a similar time, followed by Chris Payne with a time of 1 minute 43, and Mohammed Asghar rounding up the time so far, the time of 1 minute 44.1. Also, we'd like to thank the donators who have put money towards to ensure that we keep racing here today, such as Bruno Cardoso, Niranjan Kumar, Chris Payne, Jacek Frechek, Mark Robertson, and Chris Osley. As the drivers are now preparing for the 40-minute race, they will start getting themselves organised onto the grid. As Gilbert Enam is the first driver to be on the grid, Chris Payne, Mark Robertson, Mohammed Asghar on the circuit, now Alexis Clapano. Now we are waiting on Lewis Morano and Jalul to round out the grid so the race can get started. Morano is now on the grid, and now we're all waiting on his Jalul. The drivers will be making a parade lap, a formation lap, come back to the grid where they will be doing a standing start, something you normally don't see with GT3 cars, but the drivers will line up on the grid as the drivers get away for the formation lap of today's round, of the 6th round of the McLaren 650S GT3 Cup Challenge, live on RF2 Asia TV. Seeing Jalul in pole position was a bit of a surprise to me, but He is a very quick driver, so I do expect to have a good start, but don't count out Lewis Morano, the championship leader. He's had a very good form thus far in the championship, having a couple of bad rounds, but managed to retake his championship lead. We'll quickly go through the grid. On pole position, we have Jalul on pole position, followed by Lewis Morano. In third place, we have Alexis Clepano, followed by Gilbert Emnan, which is followed by Chris Payne, accompanied by Mark Robertson in sixth place, and Mohammed Asghar to round out the grid. It's a small grid today, but I am expecting a lot of action for today's race with such a variety of drivers. It'll be interesting to see throughout the whole race, as the drivers are now a few corners away from making it back to the grid, as you do see the drivers weaving side to side, trying to get those tyres warm as quick as possible, as Anam goes a wee bit wide and onto the grass, but it doesn't appear he lost place at all. Bit of a mistake by Anam. All these cars are identical McLaren 650S GT3 cars, which are official DLCs of rFactor 2, which was previously used in the World's Fastest Gamer competition hosted by the McLaren F1 team. As we do see the drivers coming to a stop on the grid, getting ready for the start. All the drivers are getting that last weave in, especially Lewis Morano and Jalul. But all the drivers are getting, as we do see Gilbert Eman really weaving that, trying to get some heat in those tyres. But Jalul is just about to reach his pit box. Lines it up very nicely. Morano, now we are waiting on Mohammed Asghar to finalise the grid. The drivers will be sitting there. As the drivers sit there, the tyres will get a bit cold. The lights are on. And it's lights out, and away we go for the 40-minute race at Fuji Speedway for the 6th round of the McLaren 650S GT3 Cup Challenge. As all the drivers are heading into turn 1, we do see Morano taking the lead, goes straight into the inside, but there seems to be an incident with Eman colliding. All the drivers are bumping together, trading paint, but it still looks like a very clean start. Jalul retakes the lead after Morano have a really nice dive coming into turn 1. Clepano puts himself in a third place, but is quickly under pressure from Gilbert Eman, followed by, as I say that, Clepano has spun the car and he's going to lose a bunch of places. That is not going to be a good start for Clepano. Hopefully he will make up those places as the race progresses. But out in front, we still have Jalul still leading after coming under a lot of pressure from Morano into the first corner. The first corner is a very tight corner, which is something that would affect the drivers. But Morano is applying a lot of pressure as Gilbert Eman goes a little bit loose coming to the Dunlop chicanes, followed by Mohammed Asghar. Mark Robertson is in 5th place, Chris Payne in 6th place, and Alexis Clepano 11 seconds behind in 7th place after having it coming together as Morano goes wide coming into the second to last corner, but he doesn't lose too much time over Jalul. But Jalul will be defending that inside line coming onto the final corner into the start-finish stretch, which is 0.9 miles long. As they come across the line to start their second lap, Jalul still leads, followed by Morano. Gilbert Eman moves up a place, as does Mohammed Asghar, who has moved up 3 spots to be in 4th place. A great start by Asghar. Mark Robertson is in 5th. Chris Payne in 6th, and Alexis Clepano having that issue on the start of the race. As Morano takes the lead into the first corner, that very tight first corner, it's all about outbraking one another. Jalul does manage to get a good pace coming out of the corner, but Morano has now taken the lead as they head into the third corner of the circuit. The two are battling it out, but if they keep battling it out, Gilbert Eman will catch up and potentially make this into a triple threat for the race lead. But Mohammed Asghar is not too far behind. The drivers are still within proximity of each other, apart from Clepano, but has made up a second But as I say that, Aman has gone off the circuit, and Morano is now taking off down the road. Jalil does handle the car quite lovely as they head into the slow Dunlop chicanes. We do see Aman losing a bit of grip at the rear end of that car. That could be an issue for him for the course of this race, but Morano had himself a nearly 1 second lead. But we have seen a lot of good overtaking moves by everyone over the entire field. Morano has the lead, but he's not too much of a lead, which Jalil could take advantage of coming to turn 1. Turn 1 is a very sharp hairpin corner. It's all about the braking. You either brake too early and risk losing time, but Jalil is making up 2/10 of a second into the straight. He's probably catching that draft of him, but it's not enough for him to go for it. But as Gilbert Aman locks up and he looks like he's losing the car, he will lose a bit of time, but he won't lose that position as Ascar is still 2 seconds, but that gap will now be a bit smaller. But it'll give Jalil and Morano a bit of breathing space for them to battle. But the gap is now down to 5/10 for first place, as Jalil made up quite a bit of ground in the first couple of corners of the circuit. Clapano is catching up to the rear of Chris Payne, so there's going to be a move up for 6th place right there shortly. But Mark Robertson has made a move on Muhammad Asghar. That'll drop him down to 5th, while promoting Mark Robertson up into 4th. As we do see a battle for the lead, and it looked like Jalil went for a move but didn't quite stick, so Morano will retain that lead and potentially get an even bigger gap over the course of its race. But that I just saw the last bit of that move by Jalil, and it was a really nice move by him. But they are still sticking close together. But Aman still sitting in 3rd. His car does get a bit loose in those very slow corners, but he does make it up for it on the straight. So I think he's got his car more set towards, as the spin happens, Mark Robertson has collided with Muhammad Asghar. That'll promote him to 4th, while Alexis Clapano is actually the biggest beneficiary out of that. He will move himself back up into 4th place after that incident involving Muhammad Asghar and Mark Robertson. As Muhammad Asghar moves out of the way, could be having some potential damage. But Chris Payne also moves up another spot himself, taking advantage of the incident, which involved all 4 drivers. But now the gap between Morano and Jalil is extended to 1.2 seconds. Morano must have had a good first corner exit compared to Jalil, as Gilbert Aman still hangs on to 3rd place, but he won't have too much pressure, as Alexis Clapano is still another 7 seconds down the road. Taking advantage of the previous lap's incident, as we're now 5 minutes into this race. We still got 35 minutes left, and we still got to factor in those pit stops that will happen in the next 15 minutes or so. But the battle is still on between Morano and Jalil for first place. Jalil has lowered the gap to 1.1 seconds, while Aman seems to be losing a bit of the pace. He might have just used his tyres a bit too much in the opening laps. But Clapano is on the pace here after having that spin on the first corner, doing a 1:39 on the second lap of the race. But Morano did get a really good lap time on the 3rd lap so far. But we do see Jalil, the gap is still at 1.129 seconds. So Jalil will have to push a little bit hard to make up that time once again, as I head into the first corner to start the 4th lap. It does look very nice and smooth from Morano entering that first corner. You got to take a knock, you got to brake heavy, but keep it nice and smooth with that steering to ensure that you get maximum speed coming out of that first corner. But now the gap has extended between Alexis Clapano and Chris Payne. As Chris Payne goes wide at the first corner, that will give Mark Robertson a bit of a chance to catch up to Chris Payne. But Muhammad Asghar has closed the gap between himself and Mark Robertson. It's nothing in it between the two drivers, only a couple of tenths. So Asghar is on charge. But once again, the gap is only slowly opening up for Morano. He will start to get away a bit more, but as he enters the brake zone into turn 10, 11, and 12, Gilbert Aman is all out on his own in third place. 9 seconds behind the race leader, but still a fair way ahead of Alexis Clepano. But he did have a bit of a rough going through that Dunlop chicane, which will be it's something I will see as being a major factor over the course of this race for Eman. But Clepano is just hammering away, trying to make up lost time from the early incidents. But the gap seems to have increased for Mark Robertson over Mohammed Asghar. Mohammed Asghar must have had a bad couple of corners, which has opened up the gap for him. But the gap seems to be closing once again. So Asghar has a lot of good turning ability with that McLaren. But still out in front, once again, is Lewis Morano as they start the 5th lap of this race. The gap is slowly closing in for with Jalil breathing down his neck, but still 1.1 seconds away. Jalil is going to have to work really hard to get back that lost time and potentially go for an overtake to retake the lead of the race. But the gap between Aman and Clepano has lowered to just over a second between the two of them. So, but it'll come into a factor at the later half of the circuit where Gilbert seems to be having issues with turns 10, 11, and 12, I believe, where he does seem to get the car loose and not having a good turning ability, which could play into the part of Alexis Clepano, as we did see in the last couple of corners. The gap is now closing down, so Clepano has a lot better turning ability, but the battle has started to form a bit here for 5th place between Chris Payne, Mark Robertson, and Mohammed Asghar. All 3 drivers are slowly coming together, as we do see Gilbert Aman and Alexis Clepano fighting it out. Gilbert goes quite a bit wide in that section. I believe it's turn 15. So this could play into Clepano's advantage if he pushes a little bit hard. But the gap is now extended to 1.6 seconds between Lewis Morano and Jalul for first place of the race. So now it's 3 seconds by the looks of it. You can see the gap on the screen. So Morano is starting to get away, which is something Morano is good at. He knows how to just put his head down and just go for it. But the battle is still on for 5th place. There is not much in it between all 3 drivers. Only about 2 seconds or so that separates the 5th, 6th, and 7th. So I'm expecting a really good battle in the coming laps between these guys. But the gap seems to have been extended between Aman and Clepano again. That's where that straight line advantage of Aman comes into play quite a bit. He does build that gap up on that long straight, but it's the corners as he does lock up coming into that slow turn 6, I believe. That'll be the advantage for Clepano to catch up once again, but only to have him lose all that effort in the straight. But the battle is still on for 5th place. There is nothing in it between 5th, 6th, and 7th. Chris Payne, Mark Robertson, Mohammed Asghar. These guys are forming a bit of a train going through here. But as Chris Payne goes wide, Mark Robertson and Mohammed Asghar will take advantage of that. They'll move Mark Robertson up to 5th and Mohammed Asghar into 6th, dropping Chris Payne all the way down into 7th place. But it's not over yet, because Chris Payne will be trying to get back that momentum he had at the start. But Asghar is having a look on the inside of Mark Robertson for 5th place. It's still on between these 2 drivers who have been battling non-stop since the start of this race, having an incident in the opening laps of about lap 2 or so. These 2 had a coming together, but it is still on. Mohammed Asghar still looks like he's catching that draft, and Mark Robertson moves to the right. Mohammed Asghar moves to the right as well, but he's moving back into the left. He's gonna have to figure out where he's gonna go for the turn 1 as they come into turn 1. Mark Robertson is trying to defend his position, and Mohammed Asghar has failed, but hope he will be having another look as this race progresses. But once again, the battle for 3rd place is still heating up. only 2/10 separate Gilbert Aman and Alexis Clepano. Clepano looks to be having a go on the inside as Aman does lock up. He's looking to have issues in the slow corners, which is the point that I've been making for the course of this race. You have to have a really good setup to handle both the long straights and the slow corners. So Clepano will be taking advantage as they head into... Oh, Aman goes wide. That'll give Clepano third place. That I was expecting that at some point in this race to see those two drivers having a go, especially at turn 10, 11, and 12, which is the slowest point of the circuit. But the battle is still on between Mark Robertson and Mohamed Askar. Askar is still looking on the inside to see looking for a window to overtake Mark Robertson, but Mark Robertson is not giving up a fight as Mohamed Askar gets a little bit loose coming out of that corner as they start to head into turn, I believe, turn 16, heading on the start-finish straight. But out in front, Luis Morano has now extended the gap to 4.5 seconds over Jalul, who seems to be losing the pace compared to Morano. Alexis Clepano is now up into third place, but 22 seconds further down the road. He's going to have a lot of effort to catch up to those guys and put in some really good lap times. But 22 seconds down the road, the only way he's most likely going to be making up that time is through the pit stops. But Mark Robertson is hanging on to 5th place as Mohamed Askar is really close behind him. Only 4/10 separate the two of them as they're still battling it out. And Chris Payne rounds out the field in 7th place, but not too far away from the battle between Mark Robertson and Mohamed Askar. But it does appear that the field is spreading out as Jalul gets a little bit wide as he heads into the final turn of the circuit, about to finish the 8th lap of the race. We're only 14 minutes in. So in the next 10 or so minutes, we are expecting the drivers to start making their pit stops to get themselves to the end of the race. Mohamed Askar, who failed to post a qualifying time, is now battling for 5th place with Mark Robertson. As Mohamed Askar is in the blue McLaren and Mark Robertson is in the grey and orange McLaren. Two very different liveries, so it won't be too difficult to tell the two apart. But it appears Gilbert Aman is losing a lot more time now. That setup with having the long straight, but has cost him quite dearly as you can see him locking up into the first turn. I don't think he will be running a low downforce setup, but he keeps locking up. He's going to not only lose grip in his tires, the tread will run low, but he goes wide at turn 4, which will not only lose time over the race leader, but he will now be coming under pressure shortly between Mark Robertson and Mohamed Askar. As they head into turn 6, Mark Robertson and Mohamed Askar have already caught up to Gilbert Aman. Gilbert Aman must have lost most of his tread and grip in his tyres. So he'll be coming under a lot more pressure between these two drivers who have been battling it out as they head into the Dunlop. Mark Robertson's been looking for a go, but he gets stopped in the middle, and that'll put all three drivers really close to each other as they fight it out. But Mark Robertson takes 4th place. Mohamed Askar follows him, but there's a collision between Gilbert and Mohamed that both drivers have been taken out. That'll put Chris Payne into a better position. Mohamed Askar is facing the wrong way as Gilbert Aman regains himself onto the track into 6th place. That'll put Chris Payne into 5th place. The one thing I have been mentioning about Chris Payne, he may not have the speed of the drivers like Morano and Jalul, but he's always in the right place at the right time when incidents like this do happen. But it appears that Gilbert did get quite loose into the final turn, which he did collide with Askar. They were both battling as Askar goes into the pit lane, but he sort of misses the entry. But he will be making his pit stop. I assume his tyres have had it. So with possibility, he might have to pit twice at this race because we're only 17 minutes in. But Mohammed Asghar would be fuming after that incident, avoidable accident into the final corner on lap 9. But the real beneficiary of that whole chaos between those drivers is Mark Robertson, who is now in fourth place, nearly less than 10 seconds over Chris Payne. Mark Robertson is only 38 seconds behind the race leader, Lewis Morano, who has now extended the gap of the lead to about 5.3 seconds. He's having a very good race thus far, having a bit of a battle with Jalil at the start, but once Morano got in front, he hasn't looked back at all. Calipano is trying to make up space. He's now lessened the gap to about 25 seconds as he heads onto the start-finish straight. What separates Morano and Calipano is the start-finish straight, which is still very close. It's still nearly a mile long, but Gilbert Aman comes back on the track. He will lose a lap. Excuse me. As he goes out on cold tires, he just goes wide into the first corner. He's got to be careful because he will lose a lot of grip coming out. But Gilbert Aman is going to have to work really hard to get himself back up there. But being a lap down, it's not looking very good for him at this early stages of the race. But the gap between Mark Robertson and Chris Payne is only 6 seconds. So if Mark Robertson does go a bit wide, you do see the two in the same frame, a shorter frame. So if any mistake by Mark Robertson, Chris Payne could take advantage and take 4th place. But Mohammed Asghar, having been spun by Gilbert Aman earlier on, is now back on the pace and looking to be breathing down Chris Payne's neck. I do expect that in the next 5 or so laps, as we are now nearly halfway through this race. The gap between Morano and Jalil is now down to 4.9 seconds. It doesn't seem that seems a lot, but considering the fact it's a very long straight, Morano does seem to have a very good setup all round, fast, straight, and consistent in the corners. As I haven't seen him lock up or go loose or anything of the sort. As we just see him go through turn 1, nice and smooth by Morano. He just takes his time, but the gap is now extended to 5 seconds, 5.6 seconds. That's the difference between the setup between the two drivers. Jalil didn't seem to have a good, as we see Gilbert Aman back in the pit lane. He must have some sort of issue with his car. Not too sure what it is, but we'll try and find out what happened. But Chris Payne is slowing down a bit. He must have had a slow corner coming out of turn 16. That could put Mohammed Asghar in a position to potentially catch up to him on the straights. But Mark Robertson is still more than 4 seconds now. It's 8 seconds, the difference between Mark Robertson and Chris Payne. But with Gilbert Aman just coming out of the pit lane now, he will now be a 1 lap down over the entire field. But he's got to be careful coming to the first turn. He doesn't want to repeat the mistakes that he made the previous pit stop by locking up and going straight. But he looks to have corrected himself quite a bit. But now the gap between Morano and Jalil is now 6 seconds. So Morano is taking off. He's going off down the road. He will try. Morano is the driver who usually we do see him pit roughly around the middle between the first and the last driver. He does vary his pit stops quite differently depending on the circuit. But his strategies always seem to work out pretty well for him, as he does seem to get himself back out on the pointy end of the field. But we are now 21 minutes in, so we only got 19 minutes left in this session, just past the halfway mark. 13 laps completed. Lewis Morano still leads. Jalil in second. Calipano third. Mark Robertson a distant fourth. Chris Payne fifth. Mohammed Asghar sixth after having a couple of issues at the start of the race. And Gilbert Aman rounds out the field in seventh, a lap down, as we do see him go a little bit loose. That is something he's just getting loose in all the corners and locking up the brakes. He definitely does not have the car set up for the corners as well as other drivers trying to make up that speed on the straights. That's going to be his Achilles heel for the rest of this race. But the battle is starting to intense a little bit more between Chris Payne and Muhammad Askar, as the gap is now down to just less than 2 seconds between the two drivers. As they head into turn 1, they are definitely in the same frame of shot, and it will be a tough battle for Muhammad Askar to get around Chris Payne. As we look up and down the field, Lewis Morano has done no wrongs thus far in this race. He will be, I will expect his pit stop to be in the next 5 or 7 minutes or so. He will definitely be pitting before the 30-minute mark, as I've seen the last few rounds with Morano. But it'll be up to the two drivers as the battle intensifies between Chris Payne and Muhammad Askar for 5th place. Askar has a really big look into the Dunlop chicane and gets the job done. Chris Payne realizes that he wasn't able to defend properly, so he just lets him go. Very good sportsmanship by Chris Payne. He could have made it a little bit more difficult for Muhammad Askar, but chose not to, as Muhammad Askar is a man on a mission. He's still only 8 seconds behind Mark Robertson, but when the pit stops start to come into favour, Muhammad Askar has an opportunity to potentially catch up to Mark Robertson and reignite the battle for 5th place. But Morano goes a little bit wide. His tyres are starting to fade a little bit. I do expect him to be pitting at some point. He's now starting to lose grip with his car, but he has been going flat out, which has lessened the gap to now down to 5.5 seconds, with Jalil catching up. I expect him in the next 3 laps as Chris Payne enters the pit lane for his first stop of the race and potentially only stop of the race. But we will have to wait and see how Morano and Jalil make their pit stops. But Clapano still maintaining 3rd place, only 26 seconds down the road, so that he is matching similar lap times to Morano. But Clapano will have to try and find more time. Hopefully he will find a lot more time in the pit stops, and depending on the strategy he goes, because most drivers will not only pit for fuel to get themselves to the end, but also to the option of changing tyres. As with Chris Payne being in the pit for so long, he will be switching tyres and topping up the fuel tank. As I have mentioned before, these McLarens don't have enough fuel in the tank to get them through the whole 40-minute race. So they do have to pit for fuel to get themselves to the end of the race. But it appears that the gap has slightly extended between Mark Robertson and Muhammad Askar. Chris Payne will now go down a lap for his pit stop, but I do expect him to be regaining that lap once Morano, Jalil make their pit stops. But yet, only Chris Payne and Gilbert Aman are the only drivers still yet who have made their pit stop. But Chris Payne's made 1 pit stop, while Aman has made 2 pit stops. Not too sure what was the reason for his 2nd pit stop. But Morano, Jalil, Clapano, Mark Robertson, Muhammad Askar are still yet to make their pit stops, as we are 26 minutes into this race. We still have quite a bit of time. I don't expect the drivers to be pitting after the 30-minute mark, so they will most likely be pitting anywhere between the next 4 to 6 minutes or so, or that's roughly 3 laps. But on to the start-finish straight, Morano starting his 17th lap of the race, or 16th, my mistake. He still leads, and the gap is now extended to 7.5 seconds over Jalil, who did start on pole position, but has backed quite a bit off. But he has been maintaining very consistent 138s over the last few laps, while Morano has been maintaining a good consistent 38 and 39s, more 38s than 39s, so he does have more pace than Jalil, which is good to see. While Clapano is a bit further behind in terms of his lap times, he's maintaining 39s, early to mid 39s, so he's not right on the pace. But once the pit stops do start to becoming a factor, that is something we will have to look out for. But Mark Robertson has been maintaining a good, consistent 41s. He's a bit off the pace, but he could put himself in a good position if any of the top 3 drivers have an incident in the next 3 minutes or so in the race. But Mohamed Asghar having a stellar start, starting from the back of the grid, moving himself all the way up into as high as 4th at one stage, but having an incident with Gilbert Aman, who has been struggling the whole race with the slow corners locking up and getting very loose at that rear end. Had a collision with Mohamed Asghar into the final corner as he was battling with Asghar and Mark Robertson, as well as Chris Payne being involved in the battle in the early goings. This is he will most likely be finding a way to catch up. He's still 6 or so seconds off Mark Robertson, so the gap is closing between Mark Robertson and Mohamed Asghar. But like Clapano, Jalul, and Morano, they're still yet to make their pit stop. So I'm expecting in the next 2, 3 or so laps between these 5 drivers to be making their pit stops. Either that, or they're going to be trying to push the car as long as they can, running the cars dry before they make their pit stop. But this is roughly around the time that you do see that most of the drivers making that final pit stop for the 10 minutes left, with only 12 minutes left to go. So they are in the pits, tyres, and if they choose to change the tyres, but we'll definitely have to fill up the car for that final 10-minute sprint to the end as Morano locks up a bit. He is losing a bit of grip with those tyres as he's been pushing quite hard. But Jalul still very nice and consistent with those tyres. He's probably taking it nice and easy, knowing his wear is most likely out. But Clapano is trying to push as hard as he can in the red McLaren in 3rd place, having an issue at the start of the race where he ended up losing it most likely by the looks of it on his own, driving him back down to the back of the grid, but moving himself back up to 3rd, taking advantages of the battles between Robertson, Asghar, Payne, and Aman. But now the gap is down to about 5 or so seconds, but Morano is now pitting. He's making his pit stop. My prediction was correct. He was going to pit before the 30-minute mark. So, and Jalul is joining him in the pits. This is going to be a battle for pit stops to see what they're going to do. Will one of the drivers make an early pit, not pit for tyres, but I don't see Morano changing his tyres at all. But we do see Clapano in the screen shot coming to the pit lane himself. But Morano goes back out. I don't think he's changed his tyres. So he's going to be trying to go the extra mile as Jalul goes out as well. As the 2 drivers head out, Clapano is just coming in. I do expect Mark Robertson and Asghar to maintain, maybe go out for another lap, or they could be going into this lap, but Morano comes back out into the pit lane, maintaining 1st place in 8 seconds. He did save a bit of time in the pit lane. Jalul lost time in the pit lane, but Mark Robertson and Mohamed Asghar will stay out for potentially another lap. But the problem with that is Clapano comes back out in 4th, but he'll have the cold tyres, so he'll most likely let Asghar go, as it takes about 2 to 3 laps for these tyres to warm up. But Clapano probably won't be under too much pressure from Asghar. He'll most likely let him go because Asghar and Robertson still got to make their pit stop. They owe us a pit stop with 9 minutes left in the session. If Asghar gets too close to Clapano, he will let him go, but it doesn't seem to be the case. It's only just less than a second between the 2 drivers. But I think the beneficiary has been Morano, but the gap is now down to 6.9 seconds. But as I say that, Jalul gets a little bit loose. They've got to be really careful with these tyres because they are stone cold when they come out of the pit lane. But I do expect these they are heading into the second to last corner with Mark Robertson maintaining 3rd place, but he most likely won't have 3rd place for long as he's still got to make his pit stop while Clapano has already made his pit stop. By the looks of it, Robertson is diving to the right. He will be making his pit stop. Asghar will follow him as well. So the battle will be on between the 2 drivers for pit stops. the gap has decreased between Robertson and Ascar. So it's going to be a really good battle for the end of the race. But the gap between Jalil and Morano is now extended to 7.8 seconds. Morano is getting away. He managed to get the heat into his tyres as soon as he could, as he's extending the gap. But Clapano is still 27 seconds down the line. He's going to have to push a lot hard in these final 8 minutes left in this race. But the pit stop battle is on between Ascar and Robertson. Robertson looks like he's away. But will Ascar get himself out just as quick? It doesn't look like that Robertson will stay ahead of Ascar. But I believe Ascar is going to be filling up the car. He's now just leaving his pit bay. So the gap looks to be in favour of Mark Robertson. He did get a slightly better pit stop out of the two drivers. So all drivers have now made their first and only pit stop of this race. This will, with 7 minutes left to go, Ascar will want to try and push hard as he can, but he seems to have fallen off the screen a little bit. He may have just had a bad first turn, and knowing that these tyres are stone cold when you leave the pit lane. There's no tyre warming at all with these cars. You've got about 2 to 3 laps of nice driving that the drivers have to make to get these tyres up to optimal temperature. And they'll just lose pace depending on the situation of the setup. But Morano is extending that gap even further over Jalil by 8.8 seconds now. Clapano still a fair way behind, only now 28 seconds separating Clapano and Morano. But 1 minute and 11 seconds down the road, Mark Robertson maintains 4th place, with Ascar moving, starting 7th place. He's now running in 5th place, 1 minute and 19 seconds down the line. So the pit stops didn't work properly in Mark Robertson and Ascar's favour. But the only beneficiary overall has to be Morano, who made a good pit stop and got away as quick as he could, but balancing out the fact that his tyres are stone dead cold. Chris Payne is still a lap down on lap 19, but Ascar could be about 20 or so seconds away from a potential going a lap down, but 9 seconds is what separates Mark Robertson and Ascar. So Robertson is definitely the main beneficiary of the pit stop race between the two drivers, but Ascar will be trying to push hard as he can in the final 5 minutes of this race, while Chris Payne having to make an early pit stop didn't really work in his favour, being a lap down, but he will still be pushing quite hard as the gap between himself and Gilbert Aman there's still quite a bit of a gap between those two drivers. So I don't really see too much pressure on Chris Payne for the final couple of laps, as we are now just less than 5 minutes away from the end of the race. But the gap is now extended even further, with Morano still out in front, but Clapano's in the pit lane. Clapano's back in the pit lane. Not too sure what's happened with this. Could he not have enough fuel? I'm not too sure what happened, or did he have an incident where he has damage? But this could very well play into the position of Mark Robertson at Ascar quite well, depending on how long Clapano stays in the pit lane. But he's back out again. He must have had a quick top-up of fuel or something. He may not have got the fuel right. So this is going to pay quite dearly for Clapano, but he's still quite a large marginal gap. No, it's not. The gap is much lower now between the two drivers, as you do see Mark Robertson and Ascar in the same frame of view on the main straight. So Clapano will have lost a few degrees of tyre warmth, but I believe that the gap is just too much great for Mark Robertson to overcome in the final 4 minutes or so in this race. But once again, the gap is extending even further for Morano, 9 seconds or so over Jalil, with only 3 minutes left remaining. So I assume we've got another 2 laps left until the end of the race. This could still be enough time for Robertson to find some room for improvement to catch up to Clapano. But if Capano doesn't make another mistake, it may not be an opportunity for Mark Robertson to catch up. But with the McLaren series so far this year, we've always seen some sort of issue at the latter half of this race. I believe with this round being no different, with Capano popping to the pit lane, that unscheduled pit stop has lost him quite a lot of time. He's now 1 minute and 4 seconds far away from Lewis Morano. So his chances of improving his position are no longer available for him. But he could potentially be coming under a bit of pressure, maybe, from Mark Robertson. But Mark Robertson is still a fair distance behind. About another 9 or so seconds separate the two, or 11 seconds maybe. But Ascar is a bit further behind as well, over Mark Robertson. So unless any of these drivers, Capano, Robertson, or Ascar, make a mistake, the results could stay the way it is, because we only have 2 minutes left remaining in the session. Morano has a choice either to back off a little bit more and finish this race on this lap, or he will push like he has the whole race and potentially get another lap in after this. We'll only have to wait and see, but Jalil's still in the frame of shot on the start-finish straight. There is still that's what 10 seconds does look like on the screen. He's now 10 seconds. So Morano is still pulling ahead. He's not slowing down at all, knowing he's only got less than 2 minutes left in the session. But he does go a bit wide. He's got to be really careful, and even though he's got a bit of a lead like that, he can't be making mistakes like that. Which has cost him about 0.2 of a second. But if Morano keeps going wide like that, he might cop a track extension penalty. But because it's so late in the race, we're only 39 minutes in, 1 minute left remaining in the race. If Morano doesn't make any more mistakes, he could come away with a win. But yet, Jalil has taken advantage of that early off from Morano, that very rare mistake, who's now lessened the gap to only 9 seconds, nearly 9.5 seconds over Morano. But it may not be enough for him to take first place, as he's so far behind. But a really good effort, but Jalil qualifying on pole position. But Morano, time has run out. This is definitely the final lap of the race. Morano has come onto the start-finish straight, moving to the right of the circuit. With the headlights flashing, he will take another win. This will be his 4th win of the season, as he takes the win at the 5th round. This will extend his championship lead, as Niranjan Kumar did not race today. So this will extend his championship lead by 30 points by my calculations. Jalil will finish in second after a brilliant effort by Jalil in qualifying. Sadly, he wasn't able to convert that into a win, but second place, that it will improve his championship hopes, which quite dearly. Capano is coming across the final corner. Chris Bain will finish the race in 6th place, 1 lap down. Taking advantage of the early incidences, he will retain 6th place that he qualified the race. Capano will gain 3rd place, having started on the 2nd row, going all the way down to 7th after early incidences in the 1st lap where he spun the car. He will finish the race in 3rd place. Brilliant effort by Capano to move himself back up into 3rd place, as he finishes the race 1 minute and 6 seconds behind. But Mark Robertson is another driver who has had a really good showing. That battle between Ascar and Aman, he will take 4th place. That will give him some crucial points in the championship as well. But Ascar will finish in 5th place, starting from dead last on the grid to finish in 5th. Brilliant effort. He could have been on for a potential 4th place, but the instance with Gilbert Aman, who finishes in 7th place, Aman had a potential to retain 3rd place after Capano's incident, but due to, I believe, the setup of his car, he just wasn't able to keep enough speed in the corners. But Morano is the winner, he will take his 4th win of the season, which is that's now get the second time this season he will get 2 wins in a row. Jalul will take 2nd place. That will give him some good points. Potentially, that'll put him in. That'll potentially give him 14 points. So that could bump him up theoretically in the about 40 or so points, I believe. But with the results being as Stan Morano takes his 4th win of the season, Jalul taking 2nd place, which appears to be his another podium, I believe, in this season for him, which is a really good effort by Jalul. Clepano a brilliant effort from Clepano to take 3rd place, having that early incident on the circuit. Mark Robertson will take 5th place, 4th place, my mistake, followed by Ascar, Chris Payne, and Gilbert Aman to round out the field. We will be trying to have a word with several of the drivers in the next couple of minutes, so stay tuned so we can get a couple of words in, especially with Lewis Morano, hopefully, with a potential. Bear with us. We will be joined by several of the drivers to discuss their view of today's race. The first driver joining us we'll be joined by Chris Payne, Mark Robertson, and hopefully Lewis Morano to give us a word about their performance in today's race. But joining us right now, we have Chris Payne and Mark Robertson. Guys, how'd the race go?
Well, not too bad, actually, in the end. I felt like quite a newbie, to be honest, going into the first bend and tagging the back of, sorry, I can't quite remember who it was, but I thought, oh dear, first time I've ever done that. But after that, settled down, got into the race, and for the first time in this series, didn't take tyres at the stop, just went to try and go as long as I could, and managed to keep the car on the track, which was not too bad in the end.
So that would explain having that huge gap over Ascar in the pit stops. As Ascar was closing down on you coming to the pit stop, that does explain how you extended that gap even further after the pit stops.
Yeah, I was really trying to save my tyres. I saw how far it was behind me, and I was trying to save my tyres, thinking that I was going to go just take fuel in the stop and just take a small amount of fuel because I tanked it up before at the start. And I thought, shall I take tyres? They were getting low, but I thought, no, I'm going to chance it. And when I came out of the pits, I managed to sort of manage the understeer from the front steer and keep the gap, and I was quite happy in the end.
Well, like that, you came home in 4th place after a brilliant effort with good battle between Clepano, Ascar, and a little incident with Gilbert Aman. Can you give us a word on that incident early in the stages of the race?
Is that when I think I just went past Gilbert, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, he collided with Ascar.
Yeah, I saw that in my mirrors. I didn't quite catch everything what happened, but I managed to sort of go around the outside of Gilbert and tried to give him plenty of space as well if it was needed. And then I was sort of just concentrating on the last part of the tricky section of the track, but managed to see that he got tagged there. So I didn't really see what happened, to be honest, but maybe you guys can tell me.
Yeah, because it looked like at the incident, Gilbert was running a bit of a low downforce setting, and throughout the majority of the race, he was struggling in the slow corners, especially with turns 1 and 10, 11, and 12, as well as 6 and 7.
Sounds like
He
most
just,
of them then.
yeah, most of the corners, he seemed to have the car set up well for the straight, but in terms of the cornering ability, it wasn't in his favour.
Yeah, I had mine set up pretty much the other way around. I had plenty of downforce on, and just to try and keep it planted through the twisty bits, and yeah, managed to keep it on the track. I think I had it was quite a good battle with Mohammed early in the race. He was very fair as well. He tagged me coming out of the last bend, and then slowed down, let me pass. So thanks, Mohammed, for that. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Well, good luck for the rest of the season, and hopefully we'll see you in the next round.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers, Lachlan.
Joining us as well is Chris Payne. Welcome, Chris.
Yeah, g'day guys.
How did it go for you in the race today?
Oh, look, I knew I was a bit slower, so my plan was to hang at the back, pick up any pieces, and yeah, I only took rears in the pit stop, but I was still too far behind.
Because you did take advantage early in the early goings of this race, including Clapano's spin on the first lap, as well as the coming together with Muhammad Azkar and Gilbert Aman. That did put you up several places.
Yeah, it did, but yeah, I was just a little slow. I don't know, that back section of this track I really struggle with, so I didn't fight them too much when they came past.
Yeah, we did notice that. That was really good sportsmanship of you, knowing that Azkar was coming behind and you did let him go.
Yeah, let the quick guys go. I'd rather that than spoil their race,
Well, hopefully we can see a bit further up the results in the coming rounds, because you do have that a little bit more pace. Hopefully you can take advantage of incidences in the final 4 rounds.
The trick with this car is you've really got to get the power down early out of the corners. Once you do that, you can get pretty fast. Maybe not as fast as Lewis.
Well, thank you for coming on, Chris.
Cheers, mate, and thanks for the commentary again.
No problem. That was Chris Payne from Tricontinental Motorsport, Tricontinental Racing. And joining us now is the championship leader, who has now extended his championship points from 74 points starting today's race to now 94 points. Lewis Morano from Andrew Racing. Welcome.
Hello, good evening.
You were unable to qualify in pole position, but you took advantage at the start of the race. Could you give us a word on the first lap?
First lap, pretty tough. Trying to get past Jalo first turn, but I overcooked it going in. So I just stayed behind for a while and decided that I'll pass Jalo on the next lap using the slipstream coming out of the straight. And then I got him from there, and then just from there, just kept it smooth all the way to the end of the race.
Did you make any tyre changes in the pit stop?
I did not make any tire changes during my pit stop. I just took around 45 liters of fuel, just enough. Actually, it was more than enough to get me to the end of the race. I think I was like 5 liters heavier than what I expected, but still a good car. Also to the finish. I just brought it home. That's it.
Well, your car seemed to be very well balanced compared to other drivers on the circuit. Could you give us a bit of a word on your thoughts on the setup of the car?
Sorry?
Your car seemed to be well balanced, fast on the straights and in the corners. Could you give us a word on how you felt with the car in the setup?
The car was pretty good overall. I really like how the 650 GT3 handles, considering it's a mid-engine layout. very fun to drive and very easy to set it up, especially for cornering. And also for the track, Fuji. I love Fuji so much. Very good track, very easy to get the car set up for this.
Well, because of Niranjan Kumar not being participating in this round, this will extend your championship lead quite substantially. With 4 rounds to go, it's looking like you're putting yourself in a good position towards the pointing end of the season.
Absolutely. I could say that this eases up the pressure a bit for the remaining rounds. But as always, anything can still happen. Who knows? Maybe Niranjan might be able to have a good run on the next few rounds. But same plan, just keep it clean, have a good finish, and just have fun as always.
Well, thank you once again for giving us a bit of a comment on today's race, and hopefully we wish you the best of luck for the rest of the season.
Thank you, and see you guys again soon.
That was Lewis Morano from Ambu Racing, the championship leader of the McLaren 650S GT3 Cup. He's now extended his championship lead to further apart. But for the next round will be next weekend at Japan as well, as we get into the final couple of rounds. Sorry. I thought we were. I thought the stream had finished, but that was the 6th round of the McLaren 650S GT3 Cup Challenge. Join us next weekend as we will have the 7th round of the McLaren 650S GT3 Cup Challenge at Suzuka. We'll still be in Japan, but in 2 weeks from tonight, we will have the fourth round of the RF2 Asia Endurance Series, which will be at Interlagos, which will be the Interlagos 2.4-hour race, which will be the 4th and final 2.4-hour race of the endurance season as we head into the final round, which will be at Bathurst, but instead of 2.4 hours, it will be 6 long hours. But with next week being the McLaren 650S Cup, will Kumar strike back once again to lessen the gap between himself and Morano? Will Morano run away with the championship? As we are only got 4 rounds left in this championship. I'm Lachlan Andrews, and this has been RF2 Asia TV. Thank you, and see you next time.